Hi, I'm George. Good morning and welcome back. I thought I'd share with you today a comment I read from a new gardener on one of my videos. They had planted a garden last year, planted it all at once, and consequently it was ready all at once, and a lot of it went to waste. They were wondering what they could do to keep that from happening again. And since that's happened to me, and I know a lot of other gardeners, I thought it'd be the perfect topic for a video. Thinking back about when I made that mistake, one of the most memorable times was when I planted way too much lettuce. I don't know if I thought we were a family of rabbits or what, but needless to say, we couldn't eat it all. And a lot of it bolted and just went to waste, so to speak, spoiled, and wound up here in my compost bins. Now, as much as I needed greens in my compost bins, I didn't need them that much. What can one do to prevent wasting your precious vegetables that you've worked so hard growing and fruits? Well, the most common is something called succession planting. Now, it has a lot of different varieties of ways of doing it. One in particular that a lot of people think of is planting one crop immediately after another is complete. Now, you can do that with the same variety, say lettuce plants, or you can split it up and do something different. Now, thing to remember though is you got to make sure your climate's right. For instance, you couldn't, in some places like mine for instance, I couldn't put lettuce and then another crop of lettuce because it just won't grow because it'll be too hot. Now, there is something that you can help with that. It's called a split season, but I'll talk more about that in a minute. So to make this easier for you, I've included a link down in the description that covers different planting times, different maturity times for vegetables to kind of give you a head start on that. Another type of succession planting is staggered planting. And what that involves is you plant a crop and then a couple, 2-3 weeks later, you plant another of the same crop. That way they all reach maturity at different times, and you can use what is ready when it's ready. Now, once again, your climate has to be right, and you have to have enough time to grow the plants you need to grow before it gets too hot or too cold. Now, before we go on, let's take a quick look at my peach trees. My peach tree, I'm so happy with it. It is blossoming up beautifully this year. It's going to be a nice pollinator and hopefully get us some peaches. A third method of succession planting is to plant plants with different maturity rates. That way they will be ready at different times and you'll be able to use them all as you need them. One example of this, potatoes. Now, I planted these this weekend, and in this first group here we have red Pontiac potatoes. They'll be ready in 80 to 100 days. In this next group, we've got what's called Yukon Gold, these next 4 bags. They'll be ready in 60 to 80 days. And this final group are russets. They'll be ready in 120 days. This way, I'll have potatoes pretty much steady for 2 to 3 months. Now, the last one, the Yukons, those are going to be touch and go because like I've mentioned before, my climate doesn't really support them, so they may not make it, but we'll have to wait and see. I might be able to get just some young potatoes out of there or some new potatoes, and we'll see how that goes. The final method of succession planting I'm going to discuss is that of split season. That is when you plant one crop at the beginning of your growing season and another at the end with a gap in the middle. That's normally because the middle of the season is too hot for what you're wanting to plant. Let's take example broccoli and cauliflower. Those are cool weather crops. They need to be in the ground early and harvested before the heat of the summer sets in. In my area, I get temperatures in the 90s quite early in the summer. So if I want to do broccoli and cauliflower, I've got to have them in the ground before the last frost, harvested before the heat of the summer. And if I want to do a second crop, I have to start the seeds indoors in August, get them in the ground, and hopefully they'll harvest before my last frost sometime in November. Now, in order to be able to do a split season effectively, you'll need to know when your first and last frost dates are, your average dates. And I've included a link in the description below to a great site that will tell you how long your growing season is on average and when you can expect those first and last frost dates. Now, let's say succession planting is not going to work for you. You may have a real short growing season when you just got just enough time to get in one crop. Well, there is an alternative. It's called preserving your food. And there's a number of ways to do that. Now, some foods preserve quite well. Tomatoes, peppers, broccoli, cauliflower, those all preserve very well. Lettuce, on the other hand, not so well. You really don't want to try to do that. However, if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll talk to you about a way that you can actually make your lettuce grow longer in the ground without actually having to succession plant. There are numerous ways to preserve food. Perhaps the most common and the easiest is freezing. Basically, you put your food in the freezer. However, it's important to know that when freezing, you often have to blanch your food. And that's a process that stops the enzymes that could spoil or discolor or change the texture of your food. This is important because, say, foods like potatoes will turn black if you freeze them and you haven't blanched them. So it's important before you freeze anything, just do a quick Google on it and find out the process for blanching and getting it in the freezer. Another great way to preserve food is with canning, and there are two main types: water bath and pressure. The type of foods you're canning will dictate what type you need to use. With low acid food, say in the case of corn or beans, you'd want to use pressure canning. With high acid foods, say like tomatoes and pickled cucumbers, you can use water bath canning. Now, canned foods last on your shelf for about a year, give or take. It's also a lot of fun and quite easy to get started. There's a little investment, but that investment, you can recoup that investment very quickly just based on the food that you save. A third method of preserving food is dehydration. Now, dehydration works for a lot of foods, but it's really great for herbs and spices. A couple years ago, I made some awesome crushed red pepper and some basil for my wife. She said that was some of the best dried basil she'd ever had, far better than what she could have purchased in the store. It also lasts quite a while. And dehydration is not that expensive to get started with. You can find a variety of dehydrators online. Freeze drying is yet another way you can preserve food. Freeze drying is a technique that uses a special machine to freeze food at a very low temperature and extract the water out of it. Now, I've freeze dried quite a few things: meat, fruit, eggs, milk, and yes, even ice cream. Now, this year I hope to freeze dry quite a lot of what I'm going to have out of my garden so that I can have it available when it normally wouldn't be. Freeze drying can help food last quite a long time with proper storage, up to 25 years in fact. While not cheap, you can over time recoup your investment depending on the amount of food you preserve. I hope to do full videos on many of the preservation techniques soon, so keep your eye out for those. While I haven't covered every method of keeping your garden from spoiling, I hope that I've given you a bunch of ideas that you can use today. If you're already preserving food or using succession planting, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you're not and have any questions, please include those as well. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you have a great day, a great harvest, and I look forward to seeing you next time.